Welcome to the Fane online event. Elizabeth Luard, that's my name, is talking to Olia Hercules about her wonderful new book. It's just fantastic, Olia. It really is. I mean, we've known each other for quite a long time, I think, and we've followed each other and work in the same kind of area. So, what I did, looking through your book again, because I had the proof copy quite early. And I went through looking for moments which really struck me. I know the borscht one is one of your favorites when your family comes to Italy and you're meeting. But the interesting, or rather the most significant thing, is the way that you handle the historical part of it and how you weave that in to your experience. So you are now, and you're looking back, and you're looking back in the way that we do when we've lost something, and we really need to find out what we can remember, and then the memories will bring us back. And I think that was very much what you were doing with this book. Olia, can you tell us about the book?
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this conversation. So I've got a pre kind of an advanced copy, but this is going to be the cover, and the book is called Strong Roots. Um, Originally, I'm from the south of Ukraine, and I've actually wanted to write this book for about 10 years since Russia invaded Ukraine initially in 2014. And I wanted to tell this story, the story of my grandparents, and the story of my parents, and the story of my extended family and the Ukrainian people, in order to celebrate Ukraine and our culture and to educate people about it, because I find that quite a lot of people, even if they are interested in history and well read, etc., they just don't really know, unfortunately, the ins and outs of what's happening now in Ukraine. People sometimes say, oh, this conflict, which started 3 years ago, and which really strikes me because it didn't start 3 years ago, and it didn't even start 10 years ago, and it didn't even start 100 years ago. There's a really long history of this force that exists in Russia. It feels like it's a little bit of a shapeshifter. First we had Russian Empire, then we had Soviet Union, and now we have Russian Federation. And unfortunately, it's this force that kind of tries to subjugate and destroy in many ways. At least that's been the experience of my family. So I wanted to tell their story, and it starts in 1921 with my grandmother Lucia's, my maternal grandmother's birth, and then tells their story throughout. And obviously also tells the story of my parents who were forced to leave their hometown, my hometown of Kakhovka, which is still occupied by Russia. Having said that, there is obviously all of this trauma and processing of identity, etc. But also there is a lot of light, I hope, in this book, and I really wanted to talk about and explore the beauty and this cult of life, I think, that we have in Ukraine in a way, through our traditions of storytelling, food, painting, decorating one's home, growing vegetables and flowers. I just wanted to bring to the forth what we are really fighting for right now. So, yeah, that's kind of the crux of it.
Hmm. Yes, it comes over very strongly, the life and the beauty of the country, and the fact that it's so appreciated, and that an awful lot of writers that I think are Russian are actually born in Kiev rather than being Russian. So it's really easy not to understand what's going on. Also, because most of the pictures that we see are of bombed out devastation and, bangs in the sky and people running. And your story is not that at all. It's partly that because, you're now living in London and you moved and you have family and, and come and go. You can't. I don't think you've been back to Ukraine. Yes, you did. You did. Yes, for Summer Kitchens, didn't you? Or
Oh,
even before then.
oh no, so Summer Kitchen's that's my third cookbook, has come out during the pandemic actually. I have been back to Ukraine in 2023 spring. So since the big invasion happened, I've my dad had some health problems, so I immediately well, I wanted to say flew over, but obviously you can't fly to Ukraine at the moment. So it was planes, trains, and automobiles to get to my dad. So I have been since, yes. I don't really talk about it in the book, but
Yes, you
I
do.
have,
And you talk about
I, I mentioned it briefly, yeah.
meeting your brother, and you have a description of your brother and the changes in your brother as a soldier.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, my brother I saw not that time. It was he actually was let out of Ukraine, and I saw him in France twice since the war
Hmm.
started. But yes, there was a change in him. But yeah, so there is this duality, there's the kind of in the book, I do talk about occupation. I do talk about my parents fleeing. I do talk about my brother's experience, who has never held a weapon in his life. On the day of the invasion, the day before, he was planning his eco bike business. Just totally not a war person in any way. But when Russia invades Ukraine, he decides, like so many other civilians in Kyiv and all over the country, he goes to a center and enrolls to defend the capital with the like he had a very famous Crimean Tatar director, film director. There was a female choreographer, and there was a baker, there was a dentist, just people that we meet in our everyday lives that make the community and your city work. They all joined in to defend Ukraine, to defend Kyiv, and he's seen some you know, really disturbing things, and it has changed them. But also, um, still to this day, he's still in territorial army. He's actually on the front lines now, not fighting. He's more in the administrative branch of that, luckily, but he's still very much on the front line in Zaporizhia, next to the nuclear plant, which is you can imagine the daily anxiety that we feel of him being there. But his spirit is unwavering, and his love of life is eternal, and he's tired. We all are incredibly exhausted, but there's this life force that is just unstoppable.
So, to go to the middle of the book, because I picked out my favorite bits,
Sure.
and one of them is when you're young, and it goes like this. I'll probably mispronounce names, but you'll have to forgive me.
That's fine, Elizabeth.
We, my brother and me, were high on a hill covered by tall wild grasses. I remember the sun spilling over the steppe, the breeze coming from the Dnipro that looked like the sea. And most of all, I remember the pride that I felt as a girl to become a real Cossack, a warrior. And I think that is so much, the way that you see what you're doing.
Yeah, so this this was an interesting thing. So I went to a school in my hometown, Kakhovka, which is, just to explain to the listeners and the viewers, Kakhovka is very close to Crimea. It is indeed in this kind of like steppe belt with this really flat part of Ukraine. Ukraine is mountainous in the west, north, and then very flat and exposed in east and south, where I'm from. And this is where actually the Cossacks, started the siege. They started their life. Cossacks, to those who don't know, were independent warriors that were very free thinking. And in the 1990s, I went to a school in my hometown. My Aunt Zhenia was my teacher, and we had this incredible history teacher called Viktor Zubkov. And he took us to this. So as I said, it's flat, but by the river Dnipro in Kherson, you get these massive kind of hills, almost that look like dunes or something like that. And he took us there to, yeah, to ordain us. We were like 10 or 11, and he had this big Cossack sword and whatever, and we knelt down and touched the earth, Ukraine, and he went, okay, now you are all Cossacks. And to me, that was really special because so for me personally, there is a lot of patriarchy in Ukraine, like like everywhere in the world. There are these patriarchal kind of like vein going all over the world. But in my family was actually the very matriarchal in a way. Uh, Obviously, the women still did the lion's share of all of the homework, housework, etc. But they were very powerful women, great models. So I grew up with that kind of feeling. But maybe in the wider society, this wasn't a thing. Like you'd think, oh, Cossack is a male warrior, and females were not Cossacks. They lived in kind of like safe settlements historically or whatever. And suddenly there's my male history teacher is turning me into this warrior, into this Cossack. And I didn't really understand the significance of it. I guess the atmosphere itself was just so, it really, I still feel it through the hairs on my head are going, and I've got these goosebumps and this real force going through me, just remembering it. As you said, there's the river Dnipro, and it's huge. I say a river, but it really looks like a sea. It's really wide, and there's these tall Kovil grasses, of the steppe, and it's June, I think, or May, end of May. It was the end of the school year, I think, and there's this wind or breeze, and there's just this really mystical almost atmosphere. And it made such a powerful impact on me that I kind of have always remembered it. And why I think I really wanted to mention it in the book, because since the full-scale invasion started and I started writing this memoir, I thought about something that one of the great Ukrainian writers has said. She's really one of the beacons of Ukrainian literature writing creativity, called Lesia Ukrainka. So she was a playwright and a writer, and she said something about her pen being her sword. Even back then, she died in 1914, I think. So end of 19th century, early 20th century. So when I think about that moment with the Cossacks and about the idea of me being a warrior and writing this book, I just feel like this is, the pen is my weapon, and my words that are not hateful, that are not that don't carry that kind of mm, a destructive force, but I hope that actually bring forth the Ukrainian admiration and love of life and creativity.
Yes, it's funny because I did pick up one of those the quotes that you had in the book from her. Can't actually see it right now, but it was very much, an important point, and your perception and the way that you were writing. Because I imagine when you were writing it, it was difficult. What are you going to say? What are you going to talk about? Will the people who are still on the planet, your close family and everything, how will they feel about what you write? You got to get right. It's as a memoirist myself, I'm acutely aware of, you can only really say, this is what I saw and this is what somebody told me. And even that is difficult, because you may not get it entirely right. But you've done it with such elegance and such clarity that it completely illuminates what you're talking about, something that's really not understood except through the prism of war. What did I say else? Your grandmother, Lucia, how do you say?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth.
was in her mother's garden. She saw Volodymyr, should be able to do that, her brother-in-law, I think, running towards her. He squeezed her hands tight and croaked, Lucia, Stalin croaked, maybe Vitebska will be let out of prison soon, which is a whole kind of storyline in itself, because that we are into the whole Doma and the result of that and that kind of thing, which you do grow into. again from your own point of view, not kind of laboring the history, because that anybody can do that. And also the fact that your writing is from a woman's point of view does matter, because you're looking in gardens and you're looking at the change of landscape. So the garden that her mother-in-law's garden. Tell me about a garden. Tell me about a garden in Ukraine. I only remember, I tell you what I do remember very strongly is the tooth marks that was it Sasha who left on the pears, who left
Yeah,
little pears in the orchard, and that was a memory that was left behind.
yeah. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this question. So, and for that memory. So, very quickly, actually the title "Strong Roots" is obviously not accidental. Gardens and gardening has always been extremely important to my family, and I think to millions of Ukrainians too. We are very much connected to the land. We're connected to our fertile soil. We are connected to our own experiences. Kind of gardening is not really the maybe the right word. It's not always about kind of making a place look pretty. It's a lot of it is actually also hard work, which so I don't want to over romanticize too much. But yes, gardens have been life-saving, really, I would say, in a way. So my grandmother Lucia that you mentioned, she's been through so much. She was born during the first Holodomor in Ukraine, so that's an artificial starvation that the Soviets have imposed on Ukraine, taking away all the grain, all the bread, and locking people in villages essentially and making them starve. She survived that. Then she was deported to from her hometown, Voznesensk in the south of Ukraine, with her five siblings and my great grandmother, thrown into a cattle train, taken to northern Russian Finnish kind of border, and thrown out there in the forest in the middle of winter to die. They survived, apart from one of them, and she came back. She returned to Ukraine, managed. She then survived the Second World War and being in both the Nazi occupation. She then, her husband, what you mentioned, when Stalin died, they're hoping that my grandfather will come back because her husband, my grandfather Victor, was fought the Second World War, but then was imprisoned by the Soviets after the war for taking some wild grasses from when everybody was starving again, once again after the Second World War. So basically, it's just this like overwhelming amount of tragedy that she has been through. But she somehow found those little spaces within herself and around herself where she allowed herself to bloom, to preserve her mental health, really. And one of them was gardening. So just after her deportation and before the Second World War, the Nazi occupation, she needed to work to support the family. And she was 16 and she starts working and then in a flower nursery. And that's where she develops this intense kind of like love of growing. And she grew all sorts of things, like a lot of food, potatoes. I say gardens or allotments, but really they are small holdings that our grandparents had. So, but it was interesting. Like, yeah, she would kind of like, send potatoes into exile. So she had like a separate allotment where the potatoes lived, all of the unsightly things. But she did have a beautiful space where she grew berries and herbs and tomatoes, maybe, but also loads of flowers. And she didn't just grow flowers, she treated them like her friends or like her family members, if that makes sense. So she spoke to them instinctively. Like now we know that there's research that if you speak to plants, they actually react in a physical way and maybe even grow better or whatever. So she spoke to them and she also sang to them. And I just feel like this is it in a capsule. This one story really demonstrates and highlights why Ukrainians now are so resilient. I feel like what she has learned through those unthinkable, even, I can't even imagine how she survived all of that from childhood. I'm an adult now dealing with war. It's different. She was from the very beginning just affected, but she found a way to not only preserve her mental health, and again, I'm not going to over romanticize. I'm sure that her life was incredibly hard. She also had 6 children throughout her life, which all survived. And she, one of her most important missions was to give them all education. She was an avid reader herself, even though she had only 3 years of education. And she somehow, maybe through DNA, there's genetic memory, but also through her nurturing and her wisdom, she passed it on to my mother, and my mother passed it on to me. And I feel like having that link, obviously, there's the intergenerational trauma and things that I'm working on really hard to think, to process still. But she also gave us the tools. Um, and I feel like, we're all struggling at the moment, but like her, I try to connect to her story, and think if she survived that, if she found those things that helped her uh, to live and to nurture her children and have energy to give, to pass all of that on to her, then I can do it too. And yeah, and it's an incredible set of tools that I feel our ancestors left for us. And I'm not the only one. I'm pretty sure, and I hear quite a lot of Ukrainians really kind of like dip back in and connect and try to yeah, try to preserve their sanity. And also a really important thing is to preserve their humanity as well. She was, despite everything that she's been through, she was very kind person. She was kind, she was wise, she was extremely empathetic. All of those horrific experiences did not harden her in that way of, now I hate everyone. She was not a hateful person. And yeah, I really try to tune into that and to carry that kind of feeling through, and to hopefully pass it on to my own children as well one day.
Yes, I think that's marvelous that you can actually you can feel the ancestral pull, which people, if you move a lot, you lose that. That's the big thing that people probably miss. And I particularly in Ukraine, where, well, as you know, because we've talked about it before, I was in Slovakia among Ruthenes at Easter, and that strong feeling you had to go to the church to have a conversation with your ancestors. I
Yeah,
mean, reassure them you were okay, which was why you took the food baskets,
yeah, yeah.
which seemed a very sort of practical situation. Okay, it's all right. Here's a slice of ham. We're still doing it right.
We're still kicking.
Yeah. It's sort of so much stronger than saying gimme, 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 isn't it? Okay, you can rest assured we're still there. And I would think I mean, it sounds to me as if that's a strong thread behind what you feel in London and looking at what's going on and feeling what's going on. And you're not disassociated from
Yeah.
what goes on back there.
No, no, exactly. You know what I do these days? Thank you so much for talking about your Ruthenian experience. It's so interesting. That idea of giving back to your ancestors and almost doing a physical, a ritual. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I'm definitely becoming more and more spiritual. I've always been spiritual, but now I think during the time of war, people tend to go a little bit cosmic with a reason. There's a reason for that. Otherwise, where's that anchor of hope? How else do you survive? And what I've started doing, a slightly different ritual, but similar to what Ruthenians did in Slovakia, with bringing the bread or ham to their ancestors in the church. What I do, I've got a photograph of me with my grandmother Lucia and my aunt Zhenia, who is also gone, and there's my paternal grandmother Vera as well, separately, but on the same kind of ancestral corner. And what I do for Lucia is, she loved roses. She loved peonies and roses, and I started using rose oil instead of perfume, just to kind of again just keep myself tuned into whatever is going on. And I sometimes take a little tiny little bit of oil, and I put it on the bit of the wood on the frame. Just, I don't know, just to have this kind of like, I'm thinking of you. And here's some rose oil, and I hope you can maybe feel it somewhere, you know? I know it sounds very esoteric and woo-woo, but I feel like um, even psychologically, this is all of those rituals, they have such an incredible power for us as humans and for our whatever state that we're in, and especially in really, really difficult times, in times when our brains are in fight and flight or flight and trying to kind of figure out and process, and things are moving on so fast. You did say like that writing this memoir has been so hard. Of course it has been, because most of the time, when you write a memoir, you have a bit of distance from it. As I was writing it, the war raged on. The war is raging on now with things, my hometown is still on occupation. I still have people living there in occupation. My brother is on the front line. My dad returned to Ukraine, and so there's all of these things happening. But all of these rituals, they really help us. And yeah, and I don't know. There's one ritual in Ukraine, a tradition. Um, it's called Kvichate, and I don't know if I hope that maybe one of the bits that you really liked in the book you've got there, but if not, I can talk a little bit about it, about painting the house. You as a painter and as an artist, I thought, yeah. So in Ukraine, for those who don't know, traditionally we had these houses called chata, Khata, and they were, I think in France, they have a similar thing where you use straw and clay to make these bricks. So you make a wall out of these natural materials, and then you lime wash it. So they're really, really beautiful and quite stout and cozy with small windows. So they're almost kind of like cave-like, almost like a womb. That's the kind of imagery that I get when I think about those houses, the traditional houses. And they were incredible things. People, actually, there's no word for home in Ukraine. There's no intangible, what seemed to me like, why isn't there this word, a very abstract word like there is in English? And then I thought about it quite, a lot, and spoke to my family, and we decided that maybe for us, the house, there might be a name for home, but you don't need it, because the house is the home. The house, we are anthropomorphize it quite often. So your house and the wood-fired oven inside are like family members, because when you get it, when you're not being deported, you hold on to it and you pour everything into it, you turn it into your own church in a way, you turn it into your own sanctuary, your own spiritual abode. So sorry, to go back to this tradition. So before every holiday, big religious holidays, but I think this tradition may go back to pagan times, pre-Christian times, because they're all kind of to do with change of seasons and stuff as well. So what people would do, and sometimes people did it themselves, and sometimes you would have a special village artist that would come and do it for you in exchange for some food or bartering another type of job or something like that. So what they would do is they would lime wash the house fresh before this amazing holiday, and then they would pick up a brush, usually made out of cat hair or other animals' hair. They would make it themselves. Um, and then they would make their own paints out of plants and maybe a little bit of egg yolk or honey or whatever you had in your household as a binder. And they would paint the walls in these beautiful swirls and flowers and animals and sometimes little people even. It's all very kind of like folk, incredible folk art. And they would paint it inside and sometimes outside as well. And then and these swirls, were supposed to, they had a practical and spiritual significance as well. They said that all of those kind of circular swirls and shapes on the wall would suck in the evil spirits. And if you think about it, what happens during the holidays? Loads of people come over, maybe a neighbor who like is talking about you a little bit and you don't really trust is coming over. And she might put a little bit of this energetic juju or the evil spirits, whatever you want to put. And they said that these beautiful swirls would suck that in. Then, after the holidays are finished, you lime wash the in white again the whole house. So you destroy in a way. You paint over these beautiful ornaments, but it's okay because the ornaments have now sucked in all of that bad energy, and you can start anew. So there's this also regenerative kind of idea, and the idea of also bringing those gardens from the outside and the inside. There's like a deep connection with nature, I feel, and with being together, not just as a people or humans, but being really interconnected with the world around you. And that really spoke to me. And I started researching it really kind of intensely. I knew a little bit about it, but I wanted to research it, and I did. And the word for it, the verb is called kvichate, to flower something up. This is the action of decorating a house in these beautiful swells. So when the full-scale invasion came, I turned one of the doors in my kitchen, well, the door in my kitchen, which was like a cheap kind of plywood. It wasn't very pretty. It's supposed to be like our temporary door, but whatever. It's just there for years now. And I decided to turn it into my canvas. So maybe I wasn't going to do the whole house, whitewashing, etc. But I took this door as my portal almost, or as my evil spirit sucker in her. So I started painting these flowers on the door. And actually, during really difficult times. So when my home region of Kherson was literally invaded and taken by Russia, and when the Russian dictator announced that now my home region is not Ukraine anymore, it's Russia, I was sitting there on the floor listening to quite a disturbing podcast about it, but at the same time I was painting, and kind of like as they said these horrible things, they go in one ear, and then with my movements of my brush, I kind of paint over it, if that makes sense, or like I suck this all of these bad news in and try and process them. And I started doing this. So it stayed, the decoration stayed there for a bit. And then I would paint over it again the next time that I have a crisis, and I paint again to kind of like the dismay of my husband, because he really loved the original one, and he was like, "Why did you do this? Don't paint over it." The first one was the best. And I'm like, it's not about being the best, or it's not about this being a piece of art, even though it's not compositionally beautiful or anything like that. I just do stuff, with I let the paintbrush lead me. And so yeah, so it's this kind of, and then I realized that it's a method, it's a technique, a cycle kind of therapy. Really, it's art therapy, what we call art therapy now, I suppose. And it's a very successful, really good technique, especially when you work with traumatized children, etc., when you just let them paint stuff. It's your eye and hand coordination, and being in the moment. All of those modern psychological tropes, the Ukrainians basically have been doing it for centuries.
Mm.
And unfortunately, this tradition died out a little bit. In the Soviet Union, people were encouraged to move to the cities and stay in these soulless gray Soviet blocks. So to remove us from our land, to remove us from our surroundings, and kind of, yeah. But this, you're linking into the Ukrainian tradition, bringing it into my home. Really, it helped me survive.
It's marvelous because you can just pick up a brush and do it, can't you? If you look behind me, I've got a cupboard
I love it.
and it's got flowers all over it because I meant to do that. It was just a plain one. It's just stripped. It's nothing. It's sort of plywood. And so that instinct to bring, the visual and also the sense. I mean, I still use my grandmother's it's flourish, it's jasmine. And if I put it in the bath, I just think, okay, you're back there. So the visual and the sensual, which happens when you're cooking, that's the joy of it, isn't it? And if the onion's been a bit overripe and you've got to take that bit out. And then when you're listening to the oven, when it's done, you probably don't even need to open the door. But actually, one of the joys of my life is making dumplings with you. You're just so brilliant at it. You can do it without looking, can't you?
I can do dumplings without looking, yeah. And I must tell you that your cupboard, because I have been to your beautiful flat and I have seen your cupboard, and I did make a mental connection, and I believe that was before the full-scale invasion, but it really stayed with me. And I had, even then, I had this kind of like little embryo of an idea in my head. And I was like, oh, maybe one day I can ask Elizabeth to teach me how to do this, and I can do a beautiful painting of my cupboard on my door. So maybe when I started researching all of those things, that also I linked back to your beautiful cupboard, which I love looking at even during this talk. Has a really calming effect. And
You don't,
yes,
you
right.
don't need teaching. You can, it just comes from somewhere else, doesn't it?
It does come from somewhere else. You're right about that. Yeah. And I loved what you mentioned about this the about cooking and about sensory input and being in tune, so that kind of being in the moment again, a meditation trope or trope of any wellness kind of idea, whether it's prayer or yoga, whatever you do, it's this kind of like just being in the moment. It's really helpful. And with cooking, it's that how how do you become a good cook? Some people say, oh, you have to cook with love, which is fine. Yes, I get it. But what does it mean to cook with love? But it actually, to me, I think it's cooking with attention. It's
Mhm.
cooking, it's first of all training yourself to be really in the moment. So as you said, oh, you could hear the onions being really like, making these really beautiful sounds in the pan when they're frying. The minute they go quiet, you know that the water has evaporated and your onions are gonna start burning pretty soon. So you're like, whoop, and you attend to these onions and you nurture these onions and you take care, and once you've mastered that skill, I feel that the second skill is actually cooking with intention. So, and that's even bringing us even more into this idea of cooking with love. So, when you cook for someone who's poorly, for example, and you're paying attention, and maybe you're also making yourself to have all of these positive thoughts, caring thoughts. You get out of some kind of a dark place and you bring yourself into this really calm place. And there's a story in the book in Strong Roots about the first time that my mom cooked for her mother, Lucia, the grandmother that I mentioned already. So she had 6 children. My mom was the youngest one. And one day, Lucia became really ill. Now we realize that she probably was taking a day off. So she would say, my heart is hurting. But my mom is a medical professional now, and she thought about it. She was like, she never really had heart problems. She thinks that Lucia was so overworked looking after children, looking after your homestead is essentially doing all of these things that sometimes should be like, okay, I'm completely burnt out and I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to tell my children that I'm ill and it's their time to really take care of me all day. So she would go, this day she went to bed. She said, I'm extremely ill, Olia. I'm going to bed. You need to cook the dinner today or lunch or whatever. And my mom was 7 years old. When I think about it,
Mhm.
that's, my God, you're so tiny. And it was really interesting. Her bedroom was where my grandmother's bedroom was the end of the house at some point. So it had a window. But then they annexed kind of kitchen, a summer kitchen to the house. So basically there was a window between my grandmother's bedroom and the kitchen. So actually they could communicate quite easily. So my grandmother gave my mom instructions on how to make borscht, which is, for those who don't know, it's people call it a beetroot soup, but it's full of vegetables. There's this delicious broth, which is rich and sweet and sour, and just is not just a dish. It's part of the Ukrainian identity, and UNESCO protected as well as heritage World Heritage dish, and so it's in our DNA. So my grandma asked my mom to make borscht. My mom, 7 years old, goes to the kitchen, and it's some links back to something that you said about memory, that sometimes you make it up a little bit, somebody tells you a story and then you build a whole world and a whole picture from it. So I've always had this mental image. I knew this story from a very long time ago, and I imagined it in my head. It's like a movie. I can see the kitchen and I can see what's happening. And I actually, for the memoir, I interviewed my mom and said, is this the right picture that I've painted in my head? And she described it, and it's in the book. And I say that so my grandma is ill. My mom is in the kitchen. She's standing on this stool. You can imagine she had to put coal inside this masonry oven that they had, or this like really dangerous probably oven that they had there, that worked by putting coal into it. And she had this, I'm sure, like blunt Soviet knife, which, would have been so dangerous to use as well. But she does, and she makes this borscht, and bringing the water in, she had to, take loads of bowls and everything, put it in. I think cooking it's so true that it's not just, it could be it's an education. It's such an education. I feel like every child has to do it. You're calculating, you're problem solving, you're doing so many things when you're a child and you're trying to make food. So my mom is doing all of that, and she cooked this borscht. She can't remember if it was like a really good borscht or if it was so-so or whatever. It didn't really matter. She said that she felt this really uplifting and powerful sense of responsibility, but she didn't feel burdened by it. From her story, that it feels like a magical experience rather than something like, oh my God, I'm 7 years old and I've now got responsibility to cook for my ill mother. It wasn't like that. I'm sure that Lucia was actually psychologically very astute, and she knew how to approach these things. So she must have made it actually quite an exciting experience for my mom. So yeah, so my mom made my grandmother borscht, and like for quite a lot of Ukrainians, I think, who might have very similar stories, I'm sure it's a symbol of it's in our blood, it's and it is a symbol of resistance now as well, I feel, and cooking in general, because again, you're with that sensory thing, you are connecting to your family ancestors through memory, you are processing things, you're being in the moment. Yeah, it's really interesting. Art, cooking, growing, it's all there. It's all there. That's what we're fighting for.
Yes, I remember coming to visit you, and you had some people for lunch. You were teaching, and you were sitting at the table, and what you were doing was you were putting out some fizzy things, you had been fermenting. And I'm a sort of Mediterranean, do you know what I mean? And fermenting says, oh goodness, I've got to boil this up so it won't kill anybody and that kind of thing. But you were doing this with tremendous confidence. I can't remember what you brought, maybe little tomatoes that you'd been fermenting and salting. And you said, "Okay, you've got to try this. You've got to eat this." So I ate it, and but it obviously doesn't say the same thing to me as it does to you. So if you'd said, "Okay, come over here. I want to tell you who I am, and I will fry a bit of garlic, and then you'll understand what I'm talking about, and I'll let it burn a little bit, or I might even hold the whole garlic bulb in a flame." Which is what you would do when you were going to boil up a bean stew in
True.
Andalusia, which is where I brought my own children up. And that smell of the papery garlic and actually probably send off the fire alarm if I did it here. And I can't use it anywhere. I got one of those things that sees it. So I have to go and find a candle. And then I have to light the candle. Then I have to hold the garlic. And that the powerful, it's not even the eating, it's the experience. That's what it is. And you were very much, that was part of what you were doing, what you were talking about. And you also, when you're talking about um, the kitchen and the garden in somehow linked, as in your summer kitchen book, um, you have a whole slew of plants just behind. So one cannot even practically see into the garden or the houses behind. And when you came to visit me, you bought a big bundle of, I think it was pennyroyal, very strong scented mint.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was had
And
tiny,
sorrel and chard. It was a kind of allotment bouquet, I think I brought you that time. Yeah.
yeah, and it was covered in tiny snails. Now I looked at the tiny snails and thought, goodness, that's lunch. Because that's I didn't think thank you very much. I wasn't really interested in the pennyroyal. I was just interested in the little snails because that's what we do in summer. So those memories are so strong and so shareable. You know, that's the thing. It's the one thing that you really don't need words to share. Um, do you find that?
Absolutely. And then again, when the experience of food does come with a story, that is that is the top, level of connecting, I think, between people. That's why when you were at mine and during my other classes or events or whatever, I'm always keen on this idea of telling a story around a really long table, if possible, if there are loads of people all together sharing a table, sharing food, sharing drinks, talking. And this is the most powerful way to connect with people. And it can be borscht for me, it can be burnt garlic for you, it can be papaya or something else for someone else from another culture. It's this the story and the sentiment that kind of goes with the food. If that comes out also, you just get it. It doesn't matter if it's slightly different things. And sometimes they can be actually really universal things, things that are that really resonate with everyone. But even if they don't in that flavor profile, that kind of circular energy that you have between storytelling and food is really powerful and really important. And I think that's why I became a chef essentially. At first I was a cook, I was a professional cook, then I became a food writer, and now, I've written this memoir as well. But initially I turned my life around. At the age of 26, I thought I studied it, Italian language and politics at kind of, looped back into that a little bit. But I had a completely different career path, and then I became a professional cook. And now I realize that one of the reasons why I think that I did was that because I was away from home, I was lacking this connection, and I loved that feeling of being together around a long table, stems from my childhood and has been, just gives me this buzz. It's like, no, it's going to sound really intense, but it feels almost like a drug or something. Like I'm addicted to the feeling of people being together, eating and sharing tears and laughter, because that's how I grew up. My Lucia was, with her six children, and they had many more children. Our extended family was huge, and everybody was everywhere. Some in, all over the world after the wall came down. People went to Germany, Russia, you name it, all over Ukraine as well. And my so she would always make sure that on big holidays she would get us together in her house. And I especially remember and love those summer sessions that we had, that we now call the family summit, and political kind of idea, but we had this summit under the walnut tree. So they would put a series of tables together, very mismatched, probably even height of them, put over a white tablecloth or embroidered tablecloth or something like that. And then, these strong female arms would be carrying out so many dishes out of the kitchen. In Ukraine, we don't have this thing where you have to have hot plates and everything has to be hot. We just bring everything out, like the whole feast, family style, as they call it in America, I believe. And you don't care about the temperature, you just start eating everything together. And so my family would sit down. Wow, the kids would be, running around, whatever, and the family would sit down and they would eat what everybody has prepared and probably has grown as well. So there's this chain of connection going very, very deep into the soil, even. And then they would talk loudly. Oh my God, like a racket, like really emotional Ukrainians that can be. I feel, it was very like, "Rah!" And then they would sometimes laugh loads, and sometimes they'd start crying. everybody would just start, not like weeping with sounds, but there'd be like really stony, serious faces, and they'd be crying, making this particular like mimicry that we all do when we're trying to hold back tears, but they would do it together. And back then, as kids, we were like, what the hell has this just happened? They were just laughing their heads off, and now they are crying. And then as you get older, you actually start tuning into those stories because they are always repeated every year. It's almost again like a very ritualistic type thing. We know these stories. They all know these stories, but they love telling them. They're amazing storytellers. They really painted a picture. Maybe that's where my kind of like love for writing and storytelling comes from. It was a world. I love reading, and it was almost like being listening to an audio book almost, or something like that. It was very alive, those memories and descriptions. And now I realize that it was a type of therapy. We didn't have therapy back then. It's only starting to appear now in Ukraine, when you go see a therapist and they work through things with you. Back then, it was sitting around the table with your massive family, crying and laughing and processing. And I'm not saying it was the perfect method. We still, God knows, everybody had loads of problems, but it really helped. It really, really helped. And I feel like maybe with my cooking and this and teaching and desire to bring people together, tell them my story, let them tell their story, share food, laugh, and sometimes cry. We do that during my cookery lessons, that's for sure. And yeah, so it's like a thing that I can't live without now. I love it. That's why I do what I do, I think.
I think that thing of that you get nowadays, which is platey, which drives me crazy. Somebody's put something on the plate, and I may not want to eat that. I may want to eat that, and I don't know what to do. And then I can see that other people feel that because if you go to a restaurant, you order one thing, and somebody orders another thing, and then you feel impelled to say you've got to taste this, and then you poke the fork that somebody doesn't want to eat, and your absolute desire for them to try this thing that you think is delicious and is on your plate. And you've got to negotiate these things sometimes because it is so normal now, for people to separate out. No fingers, too. Why wouldn't you use your fingers? You wash your hands. Everybody
Yes,
can.
too.
You've no idea what the fork has been. It could have been anywhere, really. So the child's instinct to kind of go like that.
Yep.
Oh, don't do that. Use your, I think it just kills it. So anyway, I have trouble in expensive restaurants because I'm grateful.
Who cares? You do
Yeah,
your thing.
exactly.
Keep
I
eating
know.
with your hands. I do as well. I love it. I think it's again, it's just such a sensory thing. And in Ukraine, I guess the biggest thing is that we would have bread, and bread is a massive thing for us. It's almost a sacred thing. And a piece of bread, that's one of my earliest kind of childhood memories, I think, is this time of year, end of May, beginning of June, maybe. In Ukraine, everything is seasonal. When I was growing up, there was no fresh vegetables like cucumbers or tomatoes during the winter. So you ate fermented things or root vegetables or whatever. And then the first cucumber, which you hadn't seen for about 5 months, 4 months, 5 months, the first fresh cucumber that comes into mom's kitchen, and the first tomato, the first radish, the first bunch of dill and spring onions, you put it all into a bowl, and my mom um, would cut the vegetables over the bowl. She never cut them on the chopping board. There was a reason why. If the tomato and the tomatoes were extremely ripe and beautiful, she would kind of cut and crush it almost, and the juices will come out. And then when you add the creme fraiche, which is makes the dressing, into this bowl and mix it all around, the tomato juices and the sour cream, smetana, they mingle together. And at the end of the salad, like that's what you fight for. You take a piece of bread, so me and my older brother, and you'd go straight into that bowl to kind of mop up the essence of all of these amazing things that have just come into season. It was a real celebration of this memory that just really takes me back. I even There's an incredible play that I'm working on now. When people listen to it, it's going to be already happening, called The Reckoning. It's a story based on people who have survived occupation, on testimonies given to a journalist. And in order to insert an element of this connection, and an element of a softening element, because some of the stories are really difficult to hear and to process, even through theater, which is not real, obviously. They wanted a dish, and they wanted the audience to taste the dish. And so they've invited me to kind of consult and come up with a dish that I can easily prepare on stage, and then everybody in the audience can get a little pot of. And obviously the person, one of the actors, will be also chopping dill and everything on stage, so you hopefully will get this olfactory kind of effect. So I'm doing that, and yeah, and I suggested the salad that I just told you about, because it's just such a easy thing to prepare, first of all, but also has so many Ukrainian elements in it, including dill, which, my motto in life, or like the thing I love to say is dill is life, just like everything that else that we talked about. So yeah, the salad and eating with hands and smelling things and hearing things, that's what our brain really wants and needs, the different textures of life, the life-giving beauty of it all.
Did you pass little bits of bread along with so they could dip them
Yeah.
in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They will also get a little bit of bread. By the way, this is not alcohol. This is kvass, my fermented homemade kvass. I forgot to bring a glass, so I'm
You're
sorry.
fermenting. You're fermenting again, Olia. That's so brilliant. Tell us about kvass.
Right. So there are different types of kvass. Kvass is a very old Slavic word, which really comes from the word sour. So in Ukraine, we don't say fermentation. Fermentatia is a very clinical, weird scientific word to us. We say kvashenya, which comes from this word kvass, which means sour. So making things sour. We didn't really People didn't necessarily know the science and the microbes, and even that it was amazing for your gut health. They just instinctively, intuitively, and just did it, and out of necessity, I suppose, because you have this glut of vegetables in September that you've grown all summer, and then you've got winter coming, so of course you'll fill your cellar with thousands of jars, hundreds of jars every season. And then sometimes you would also have a massive barrel of something fermenting inside. Watermelons in Ukraine, whole watermelons fermented in the brine, or apples or tomatoes, as you mentioned before. Yeah, so that's one of my favorite ferments, and so easy if you're a beginner. Highly recommended, people. And so yeah, so we would so fermentation, this kvaschen now is a massive part of our culture and our tradition. So the kvass that I'm drinking now is made out of sourdough bread. So I make my own sourdough bread with a starter taken from Ukraine, from my hometown. My friend Katria Kaluzhna is an amazing baker, and she also survived the occupation and escape and everything else, and she took her starter with her, and she gave me a little bit of it. She sent it to me from Lviv, where she's in relative safety now. And so I bake this bread, and then what you do when you have some bread left over, it's basically a crime. It's a spiritual crime to throw away bread into a bin. So we would never do that in Ukraine. Or if you drop it or whatever, it's a sacred thing because of the amount of starvation and all of the trauma that we went through that. So I would never ever dare to put a piece of bread in the bin, like compost bin maybe sometimes, but not even compost bin. It's like, so what you do with it, and to all of our listeners or viewers, it's very easy to do. You take this piece of bread, preferably organic rye sourdough, when it's dry and you've got like some leftover, a couple of pieces. You put it into a jar. You put some cold water over it, and actually in this case, instead of a brine, instead of sugar, instead of salt, sorry, we put sugar in, or honey, or whatever, like with kombucha, something like that. A couple of raisins, organic raisins or something like that, because they will have those yeast that you need. You loosely cover it, leave it somewhere nice in your kitchen, and depending on the weather, if it's really hot, within 2 days it will start becoming effervescent. All of that sourdough bread becomes soft, and and all of the lactobacteria start, multiplying, and you have this incredible probiotic drink essentially, and which is also really delicious. And then you strain it out, and you can flavor it with other things. So the one that I'm drinking today has homegrown rhubarb, which I just blitzed with some sugar raw, and also this really strange orange, which is called vanilla orange. It's through this really interesting supply. So it's a vanilla orange and rhubarb kvass, which is extremely good for you, and it's really delicious, very quite sour, but also with the hints of fruit and a little bit of sweetness there too. So yeah, it's part of our culture and full of life. Again, we're coming back to that thing. It's um, it's not hard to look after your ferments, but you do have to care, and you have to put a little bit of time and attention in. And again, that's life, and that's kind of like sustaining life and living in symbiosis really with the microorganisms which make us work. Like if they're not there and they're not in your gut, you will not be this resilient. You will not be able to survive.
Hmm. Is the rhubarb chopped up and in there? Sudden
No, I
curiosity.
blitzed it. So I blitzed it raw. So I blitzed it with sugar, and then I added it to the kvass, and then the sugar is being consumed with the rhubarb bits by all of these bacteria. But yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a really delicious drink, really easy to prepare.
Yeah, got to. But would you put that in the borscht at all? In the borscht?
Aha, so maybe not the bread kvass. Bread kvass we use for different kind of soup, but we make beetroot kvass as well, which is essentially just some beetroots, water, and salt, and you leave them to ferment, and then the liquid from it you use it, which is sour and earthy, obviously from beetroot, but also almost like a pickly kind of flavor, deep red, and you add it to your borscht when it's cooking, and it adds color and this incredible sour flavor. You add it for flavor really, because obviously all of the bacteria are killed or whatever, but it's still a super healthy addition to your diet. And we also just drink it raw as well. It's like a really delicious kombucha. If you don't know what kvass tastes like, it's kind of like that. It's really, really tasty, effervescent thing. Yeah, but we cook with ferments as well as eat them raw, 100%.
So the color of the borscht, which is always red or not always red?
You know the questions to ask me. So, uh, i- Ukraine is huge. It's bigger than France. I still feel like I have to tell people, like, I don't know why it's been such a blind spot on people's mental map, but it's a massive country, the biggest in Europe, really. And it is extremely regional as well. So we always say like, oh, France is regional cuisine, Italian regional cuisine. There's a regional cuisine in every single country, even the small ones, because chances are the landscape changes, the climate even changes, what grows around you changes. So of course you're going to have your own influences. In Ukraine, up north and in the west, you've got woodland and sap mushrooms and wild bilberries and all of those earthy things, like in northern Italy, let's say. And in the south, where I'm from, it's the bare steppe. We're close to the Black Sea and to Crimea, which is this very special microclimate there. Or it's a Mediterranean almost kind of situation. I think you, Elizabeth, in one of your books, in probably in Squirrel Pie, you said about Romania that it's like a Galapagos Islands of influences and cuisines and all of that. So that's the south of Ukraine. So borscht is different in every region, and even within a region it can vary between different points. Unfortunately, a lot of those regional differences have been quashed by the Soviet rule and their standardization policy, where they wanted to make everyone just make one type of borscht, one type of plov, your token Ukrainian dish, your token Central Asian dish, whatever, and everybody has to be Soviet with the Soviet identity, blah blah blah. So that was destroyed, damaged in a way, but we're going back to it and we're discovering so much more. So borscht, sorry, going back to your question in a roundabout way, is different in color and different in everything. I found a village in Police, northern Ukraine, where in the past, before Stalin dried up all of the marshes and all of the natural habitat to put some industrial fields in there, they made borscht with elves, with baby eel. I know. It was a discovery for me and many Ukrainians that I know. They were like, "What? They made borscht with eels?" Yes, not no longer there, but there's that tradition. And the color up north, they would use red beetroot and this fermented kvass that I mentioned. And that would make your borscht almost like purple, red, really deep purple color. Where I come from, because of the nature of the soil and the way that they grew beetroots, from what I understood, we used pink or yellow beetroots to make borscht. So actually, the color at a certain point when tomatoes started appearing in probably early 20th century, the tomatoes give it the color really. The beetroot is there for a bit of earthy flavor, but it doesn't give any color at all. The pink, deep, amazing tomatoes is what gives the borscht a pink color, very pale. And then if you put sour cream in it, it makes it even more of a dusty rose kind of color. So to my grandmother, a red beetroot was whoa, a no-no. She was really militant about it. She was like, oh my God, my boy, who thought about this red borscht? It dyes every single vegetable red. You don't see the difference in colors. And to her, it was like not interesting enough. She wanted it pink, and so you could still see the peas in spring if she put them in, or she could see, I don't know, the color of the carrot, which is orange. It's really interesting the way, she needed to have this color palette on her board. She couldn't have it one color. But of course, now I realize it's basically because of the difference in what they could find where she grew up. She grew up with pink beetroots and big tomatoes. So that was her thing and what made her borscht the real borscht. But people up north had these purple beetroots and this kvass that they made. So they had a deep, deep purple, and they didn't care that they didn't have the whole palette. Like it's fine, So it's interesting to have this difference in Ukrainian regions and different traditions of how to prepare things. And yeah, I'm still discovering a lot about that, and it's never ending. I think, poof, there's so much information still to uncover, and I look forward to it.
So, which one did you cook for your parents when they arrived in Italy for their holiday, when you were waiting for them?
Oh yeah, except it wasn't a holiday. It was so Elizabeth, if you are referring to that bit, it's when my parents escape their hometown. And it
Hmm.
does, yeah, and I think I imagine when I imagine the car. So long story short, they were in my hometown when the full invasion happened. The Russians come in, tanks roll in, they stay in occupation for a couple of months, then they threaten my dad, say that we're gonna put you into this torture basement, and I convince them to leave, and they leave. And it takes them ages. They go through these, battle, like the countries in the war. They drive through Ukraine, they drive through Europe and go to Italy, where my cousin Ihor, who is a trauma surgeon, he's been living in Germany for a long time, has just bought a house there, one of those dilapidating Italian, villas. So they drive there to, so not unfortunately a holiday, but more like a
Not exactly. Yes.
temporary sanctuary, and and I
Mm.
fly out there to make to greet them, because the idea of them coming into a cold house, it was April, it was cold still, especially in northern Italy. It was by Lago Maggiore. And I imagine them coming into this cold home with somebody else's plastic plants, and it's not, they haven't had time to make it cozy and nice, But the kitchen is quite nice actually. That's one part of the this house which I don't really love, which is cozy, and it's got tiles and a little wooden stove, and you can see a bit of the lake, and it's beautiful. And I just think I want to be there before they arrive from this grueling 5-day journey, escaping war. I want to make them borscht, and I want to greet them, hug them, and just take care of them. And they need to come in and smell the things. They need to smell borscht. Going back to our kind of like, we turned into the sensory kind of mental health preserving discussion. So I fly out the day before they get there, and I get the keys. I come in the house. It is cold. I put the wood fired oven on in the kitchen. I warm it up. I immediately go to the supermarket, which looks really drab, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a tiny little hamlet. It's a tiny little place. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not gonna find any beetroot. I cannot make them borscht, the end of the world. And then I'm like, breathe. You can, even if borscht doesn't happen, that's not it's not essential. It would be like cherry on the cake, but it's fine. So I go in and it's this amazing supermarket inside, a cornucopia of Italian ingredients, puntarelle,
Mm.
monk's beard, asparagus, artichokes, you name it. Normally a heaven for a food person like me. But I'm like, okay, calm down, look for beetroot. And I'm just like darting around the thing like this detective looking for this beetroot. I find some vacuum packed. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be weird. Like we'd never use pre-packaged beetroot, but okay. Then I don't find dill, but I find parsley. I'm like, okay, this is fine. The main thing, find a good chicken, not farm, not like an industrial farm chicken, a wiry old bird that looks dinosauric and that is full of flavor, which is what we need for this borscht. So I decide to make this chicken borscht, and I find it. I find this little shriveled chicken, and I'm like, this is going to be really delicious. And I haul these huge bags, and I buy like a six-pack of beer, and I've just got this and I have to walk uphill, really uphill. And I freak out, and this woman, Italian woman, I'm hauling the, car. I can't find a taxi. Anyway, she takes me back after this ordeal. I get back home, and I start cooking. And when a kitchen when it's cold outside, and then when you start cooking, the kitchen side becomes, there's condensation on the windows, and it's full of these smells and steam and sounds. The borscht is making these bul 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 kind of like sounds, and you're like, okay, I've created this tiny little microcosm of Ukraine in this kitchen in northern Italy, and they're coming, and I'm ready. And they come, and my mom is like, we're 5 minutes away. The house is on this really dangerous, steep, one of those, corners that you do on the mountains. And I come out, and like a strict traffic warden, I stop the cars so my dad can park in the garage. And as you said, holiday, it's true. I don't know what I'm imagining in my head. I'm like, oh, they will have all of these, a lot of, like, they're going for a big holiday, or like they're moving house. And then I think, yeah, they're moving house. So I'm expecting even to see, I don't know, little bits of furniture. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. Like, and then I just see these three bags, these small three bags. I'm like, Mom, where's your stuff? And what's in these bags? And one of them is very meager couple of things of clothing. The second one is full of my mom's embroideries, all the rushniks and all the tablecloths and everything else, everything that she's stitched together. And then another one with photographs and letters. And that's all she takes. And if you don't mind, I will read a poem at the end of this. I will read the ending of this chapter. I'm sorry for any spoilers, but it's worth reading that whole chapter, I think. We have this incredible poet in Ukraine, Serhiy Zhadan. He's very punk, actually. He's actually in a punk band as well. He's a musician and a poet and a writer. He's incredible. He's from this, he lives in this city called Kharkiv by the Russian border. They sometimes say as a city that, has shown the middle finger to Russians and is still standing and is resilient. So he has this poem. That is it. I think of a poem by Serhiy Zhadan, Ukraine's most famous contemporary poet. Take only what is most important. Take the letters. Take only what you can carry. Take the icons and the embroidery. Take the silver. Take the wooden crucifix and the golden replicas. Take some bread, the vegetables from the garden, then leave. We will never return again. We will never see our city again. Take the letters, all of them, every last piece of bad news. It was written in 2015. There's nothing different today. I check if Mom knows the poem. She doesn't, and its description of a home so similar to hers makes her cry again. I float the idea that the words in this poem might be true for my parents' situation. What will they do then? But Dad's expression at that moment is that one I have known from as long as I can remember. The expression he had when I told him I thought our dog would die, when I doubted I would pass an exam, when I believed I wouldn't get that job. His face has the sheen of an oracle. Все буде Україна. It will all be Ukraine. It will all be okay. Both of my parents believe they will be back home by the end of summer. There just cannot be any other way.
Right, darling.
I think this is quite a nice ending to this.
I think perhaps we don't need to say anything else, Olia. And thank you so much.
Ah, thank
for
you so much, Elizabeth.
That was marvelous.
Thank you for your amazing questions and for being my friend and supporter and fellow powerful, beautiful, creative woman that has helped me throughout the years. I really, really love you and thank you for all of your work and everything you've done. You're a huge inspiration in many ways. And thank you, Fane, for having us today. Thank you.
Yes, I'm doing a Ukrainian cry, I think now.
Thank you to our audience for joining in.
Indeed.